Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the Ferris Wheel. I'm one of your three co-hosts, Ferris Kennedy. To the left of me in one side of the studio,
Dr. Ian Clarke.
And across from us through this beautiful little glass window,
the third amigo, Stephen Wheeler.
And of course, Armando, our producer, is still licking Wheels' head. Man, you just love getting accosted, don't you?
Yes, I do.
So today we're continuing off our series segment of special pieces. So for those of you that tuned in, obviously Ferris Kennedy, which is myself, did a piece on the Foo Fighters. And today, Dr. Ian Clarke is doing a piece on... So for those of you that know the Roadhouse Blues... He's doing a piece on the Doors, which in French they're called Les Portes. So, without further ado, Dr. Clarke, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Okay, the Doors. I really know nothing about them, so my segment's pretty well wrapped up right now. The Doors were formed in 1965 in sunny Los Angeles, California. And if you take a look at the Doors right now, they fall under a few categories. They fall under psychedelic rock, which is a great category, psychedelic rock, blues rock, and acid rock. The overall macro themes of the shows we do, of course, is classic rock, and all this fits under that umbrella, so keep that in mind. They were active from about 65 to about 73. The last 2 years, 71 to 73, they only had 3 members. Somehow they lost their lead singer, but of course much more on that. 4 members: Jim Morrison, vocals, Ray Manzarek, keyboards, Robbie Krieger, guitar, and John Densmore on the drums. Originally, Manzarek's brothers were in the band, but they dropped out. And so Ray looked around. He had a group called Rick and the Ravens, and he looked around to start another band. And he was just playing local gigs, high schools, picking up money with his brothers. And then he went to the UCLA film school, and at the film school he met a guy named James Douglas Morrison, a kid from Florida. And they kind of got along. But they didn't really hit it off. They didn't really speak about music. But what happened is that they graduated, and one day Manzarek was walking along a beach in Venice, California, which is an interesting town if you ever get a chance to visit. It's very odd. Walking along the beach in Venice, and who did he see but Jim Morrison sitting on the beach? And he said to him, "I thought you went back to New York. Wasn't it the plan?" And he said, "Yeah, I was going to go, but I decided to stick around. I'm living over there." And he pointed to a nearby home, and he said, "I'm living on top of that rent-free." And obviously he was taking a lot of drugs, and he had often been a heavy-set kid, but he'd slim right down and become the guy we now know as the Lizard King. Good-looking kid. Manzarek said, "So what have you been doing?" He said, "Well, I've been writing songs." And he said, "Wow, can I hear a few?" And so he sang a song called Moonlight Drive. It really impressed Manzarek. He said, "What else you got?" He sang another one. He said, "Listen, we got to form a band." And Morrison replied, "Ray, that's exactly what I've been thinking. And I got a name for it." He said, "What's the name?" He said, "The Doors." And he said, "The Doors? Where'd you get that?" And he said, "Well, I got it from Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, which itself is a reference to a poem by William Blake, which I can quote. It says, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." You got to love these 60s bands, right? They reach so high. I could mention the Doors were a rarity in many ways, but one that kind of really stands out when you're researching them is that every member was a university graduate. That is like hen's teeth in rock music. It doesn't happen. The reason I mention it is that when you take a look at the band, the lyrics and the skill and the aspirations and the intellectual pitch, it makes sense. These guys were very different. Let's get back to the beginning. They signed with Elektra Records in 1966, and they released their first album called The Doors. That first album is commonly known as one of the best debut albums of any band at any time. Every song is strong. And of course, it featured the number one hit of the Summer of Love called Light My Fire. We're going to play that for you in a second. Before we get into it, I'll talk a bit about it. Light My Fire came about because Jim Morrison was tired of being tasked with writing all the songs. Jim Morrison didn't play an instrument. He would just hum along. And the other guys, especially Manzarek, would write chords behind it, and they'd tackle it that way. So one day Morrison said, listen, you guys get in the ball. Why don't you go out and write songs and come back and we'll take a stab at them. So that night, Robbie Krieger went home to his parents, and he wrote a song that Morrison said should be based on one of the elements, fire, rain, what have you, because that'll make it last. It won't be dated. So he wrote a song based on fire.
But I really like that. Yeah,
what he did was that's Bach. He put a Bach piece on the front of it, and then they melded it together, and they had Light My Fire. They didn't know how to start it, so Manzarek crawled off in a corner with his keyboard and came back with Bach. And these guys knew a lot about music. They knew how to orchestrate. They knew kind of strange timings. If you listen to the drum beats that John Densmore comes up with, it's not standard 4/4 stuff. He's all over the place, right? So that was 1967. They released 8 albums in 5 years. All but one hit the top 10 on the Billboard 200 and went platinum or better. What I'm trying to do here is convey how popular the band was and ultimately is. Their self-titled album, which I've mentioned, was the first in a series of top 10 albums in the United States, followed by Strange Days, 1967, Waiting for the Sun, 68, The Soft Parade, 69, Morrison Hotel, 70, Absolutely Live, 1970 again, and their final album, L.A. Woman, from 1971. So we got 20 golden albums, 14 platinum, 5 multi-platinum, 1 diamond in the United States alone. Okay, most listeners, most of you out there know of Jim Morrison. He's one of those cultural figures you can't get away from, be it James Dean or Marilyn Monroe or whomever it is, right? He's just part of the American psyche now, and you often hear him referenced. And so when you look into the Doors, you say, who was this guy? And where did he get the meat for his songs? Because Morrison was kind of a kind of a dark guy. He was never, he didn't joke around much in his lyrics. So if you start looking into the Doors, you always are drawn back to his family history. And what I'll focus on right now is his father. His father was a rear admiral in the United States Navy. Now, that's almost as high as you can get. His name was George Stephen Morrison. And interestingly, he was the commander of the U.S. naval forces in the Gulf of Tonkin during what became known as the False Flag Gulf of Tonkin incident, and that was in 1964 in August. You can read about that, but basically that sparked American involvement in the Vietnam War. So in other words, you got his son on one side playing these anti-war songs. In fact, the Doors had a song called Unknown Soldier, which is one of the anti-war songs. And then yet the father on the other side is leading forces, American forces in Vietnam. When it's around the time of their first album, his father wrote him a letter, and I can quote from it, because it's almost the key to unlocking the personality The aggression, anyway, the darkness of Jim Morrison, what he rebelled against. This is what his father wrote. Give up any idea of singing or any connection with a music group because of what I consider to be a complete lack of talent in this direction. So he never contacted his mother or his father, obviously, again in his lifetime. And they tried multiple times, especially his mother, but he cut them off. Obviously, it wasn't a wholesome situation. They had a song called "The End," and if you listen to that, where you'll run, I guess, screaming from the room right to a Freudian couch because he's talking about killing the father and making love to the mother. Very Oedipal stuff.
That's Freudism.
Freud had
You want to kill your dad and you want to sleep with your mom, basically.
Yeah, a concept called the Oedipus complex, based on a Greek play. And that's what The End is kind of based on.
That's dark.
It's really heavy stuff. Now, if you see the first 5 minutes of Apocalypse Now, what song does Coppola use? This is the end, my own, as they napalm villages. So that was Jim Morrison. That was Jim Morrison in 1967. And another part of it is what his closest friend Ray Manzarek said. There's two people, one called Jim and one called Jimbo. And he often Manzarek said Jim was this easygoing southern-type gentleman from Florida who actually had a southern accent. And the other persona, whom he turned Jimbo, was an aggressive alcoholic, seemingly suicidal, physically abusive to women, completely unreliable on stage.
So Jimbo was the one who showed his junk and got arrested for during one of the shows?
That's true. That was Jimbo.
That charge got dropped, actually, not too long ago.
Yeah, the governor of Florida, who was a Doors fan, came out and said, well, 50 years after the incident, whatever it was, we'll clear the books.
But there was also a third Jim Morrison, was there not, in Wayne's World? Or is
Yeah.
Mystic in the Desert.
It's Stuck in the Desert. That was, it was like this mellow, laid back. Is that one Jimbo? Who's that one?
That guy's Jim because he kind of talks like this, man. Yeah, this kind of flat thing that Morrison often did, this kind of monotone, because he was probably so heavily drugged. Okay, we spoke about what's known as the infamous Miami incident. They were playing a concert in Miami in 1969, and Jim, perhaps Jimbo, may or may not have exposed his private parts. In any event, he was arrested and charged with lewd and lascivious conduct, drunkenness, profanity, and indecent exposure. He was found guilty of misdemeanor counts of indecent exposure and open profanity, and sentenced to prison and a fine. And that case was on appeal at the time of his death. Why don't we get to some more music? I was thinking of this recently because I was watching a great documentary on the Doors. I think it's called People Are Strange, and it's narrated by Johnny Depp. It came out about 2-3 years ago, roughly. And they talk about this song. This song, I'm going to play the chord progression from it just briefly, and then I'm going to play the chord progression from another huge 1960s hit. So, this is the chord progression from a big song, I think they went to number 3. I'll see if I can just pick it out for the top chords here. Here are the chords to it. Okay, now I'm going to play the other hit from almost 2 years earlier. First song is by The Doors called Hello, I Love You.
Won't you tell me your name?
Yeah, won't you tell me your name? And the second song is The Kinks. And the Kinks had 2 songs, All Day and All of the Night. Anyway, what happened was that the Doors were sued for copyright infringement. And whenever that song is played in the UK, the Kinks make money. It's a very strange kind of a situation.
We talked about this yesterday, too, about the top 10 ripoffs.
Yeah.
And the Kinks, that the Kinks song came up. So interesting how we're going to go to this. So which song we're going with now, Ian?
Let's go with Hello, I Love You. It's just an interesting song. It's super pop. They had great trouble producing it. But again, it pulled them on. We're talking AM. It put them on the AM band. I've heard that song personally referenced in a university seminar on poetry about the 1960s, where there was so little commitment in relationships. Like I could say, hello, I love you. Won't you tell me your name? So, you know what I mean? This guy's really putting a lot into the relationship. They played their last show in December of 1970. Now, I wrote a little note here. This comes from a witness of that show. And that show was in New Orleans. Okay, midway through the set, Morrison began to forget the words to songs and then tried to compensate by launching into a long, rambling joke that fell flat. The singer was hanging onto the mic stand for support as the group launched into Light My Fire. And during the solos, he went and sat on the drum riser, failing to get up to sing the last verse. Drummer John Densmore finally nudged the recalcitrant singer with his foot, whereupon Morrison went over to the mic stand and repeatedly smashed it into the stage until it splintered, then threw the mic down and abruptly walked off the stage, ending the show early, unquote, and he ended his live performing career. In fact, that they've preserved that smashed up bit of stage. I'm not sure what happened. It might be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where Morrison smashed the stand in, and that was it. Manzarek years later, he said he actually could see the spirit drifting off Morrison's body. He said he was never the same after that. And after co-producing L.A. Woman, because the original producer, a guy named Paul Rothschild, who had also done Janis Joplin and a lot of great 60s groups, walked off the project because he didn't like the music. So they co-produced L.A. Woman. The Doors fulfilled their contract with Elektra Records, and Morrison split the scene. Now, he had wanted to quit the band for a while, and certainly his girlfriend, a woman named Pam Corson, had pushed him in this direction. So this was his big break, his opportunity. So in March 1971, Jim Morrison left for Paris, and it was there that he died on July the 7th, 1971. And he was welcomed through the pearly gates, I'm sure, by other members of the dreaded 27 Club, whom our listeners will be familiar with from previous shows. One of the last things he wrote was a thing called Paris Blues. There's only four lines to it. Going to the city of love, going to start my life all over again. Once I was young, now I'm getting old. Once I was young, now I feel cold. While I'm going overseas, going to grab me some of that gold. Well, Jim Morrison didn't have time to grab the gold. He died in a rather mysterious way from what was believed to be a drug overdose, heroin. Perhaps he had a heart attack. He had had rheumatic fever when he was a child. That's a condition that can damage your heart. It can weaken it. So regardless, at that time in his life, Jim Morrison wasn't doing a lot of 5K runs. He was in rough shape before he left for Paris. Now, as Pam Corson, who I mentioned before, his girlfriend, was with him when he died. She was a heroin addict, and there was heroin in their apartment, apparently. And as a side note, she was dead 3 years later from a heroin overdose. She died in Los Angeles. Now, the Jim Morrison might not be dead rumor that persisted easily for 10 years. And was aided and abetted shamelessly, I think, by the late Ray Manzarek. What happened was that Morrison was buried without anybody aside from the Pam Corson, who was really doped up, having seen the body. And so that's when the Jim. Plus, he was that kind of guy that could possibly do that type of stuff. He was, as I said, a dark character. So. Strangely enough, in keeping with the Morrison myth, that fueled interest in the Doors, because about every 2 or 3 years, some guy would pop up claiming to be Jim Morrison, or somebody would make a record, and you'd think, God, that sounds like Jim Morrison. And that's where that started.
Now, Ian, did you see the Oliver Stone movie on the Doors?
I did. I saw it came out, and I got in line, went in, and I got to say, it was a Val Kilmer, right? Did Morrison. He was excellent. But the rest of the guys, I thought, were just kind of it was like there was some strange supporting cast.
Well, it's funny you say Val Kilmer, because the truth is that it was actually supposed to be Billy Idol that was supposed to play the role of Jim Morrison. But Billy Idol ended up getting into a motorcycle accident a couple of months before that. So what happened was he had to relinquish his starting role as Jim. They casted Val. But Billy Idol was actually in the movie as a tertiary character, I believe. And it's kind of interesting. I would have liked to have seen, or actually got your point of view on it, if you would have seen Billy Idol perform, if you would think the same way.
That's interesting, because Billy Idol does a really good version of L.A. Woman.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
On his Cradle of Love album.
I think so. He does it live, too.
Yeah. So, and here's my thing. Just because Billy Idol is an actual musician, Val Kilmer's not. Now, Val Kilmer also did the Ten Commandments with Adam Lambert, and he did a lot of theater stuff, which is fine. But that particular role, I think, was smart that they had casted Billy Idol initially, just because of being Billy Idol, being already a successful musician. He could kind of relate to that kind of lifestyle, kind of like that BS that they go through as musicians. Because I'm assuming Jim Morrison's death was kind of self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Okay. So, not saying Billy Idol has those thoughts, but it just could have been kind of interesting. It's unfortunate. Val did a good job, don't get me wrong, but...
Yeah, it'd be kind of cool to see a singer in that role.
Yeah.
But Kilmer, I think, knocked it out of the park. He had this walk down. In fact, I can tell you kind of an interesting incident from the movie. Morrison supposedly was married in a Wiccan ceremony. And the woman who he married, Oliver Stone, the director, got her to perform the ceremony in the movie. It's so strange. So she showed up, and she said she was waiting on the set, and she looked up, and down the hall came Val Kilmer, dressed in Morrison, dressed like Jim Morrison with the hair and everything. She said her heart jumped into her throat, because for that millisecond, she thought he was alive.
I could see that.
Yeah, because he looked up, and he's kind of backlit. The poor woman, who was his Wiccan wife, looked up and saw him.
But these theories of certain artists that have come and gone, that they're still alive, people still saying, Tupac, the biggest one, that he's still alive. I believe your story here that they kept Morrison alive for, I don't know, how many years after, or they claimed he was alive after.
Yeah, I think everybody knows that somebody with a large personality, even Tupac, these guys are gone. But for commercial reasons, which is really morbid, they will often kind of fuel these rumors.
Money. It's all money.
Yeah, it's just money. They're gone. It's over. And so...
Which, although it's strange, because now what we do is the opposite. We sell a dead artist. Like, we sell Prince and Michael Jackson. Nobody says, "Oh, you're still alive."
You can't.
It's more, but at the same time, they sell more now that they're dead.
Yeah, it's true, because Cobain faked his death once before he actually passed away. Yeah, he faked his death. So
you can't do that. Back then, it's too sophisticated now. The last person that really took off that way was Elvis Presley. He died in 1977. But with the internet, you can't. They'll track you down. You don't have it's not like, pre-internet, you could kind of vanish for a while. But now, I think it'd be really tough to fake your death, maybe. But anyway.
Somebody just has to hack into your credit card account.
Yeah, you'd have to live a cash life on some Greek island and eat berries and nuts or something for the rest of your life.
And now that you say that, maybe Leonard Cohen's alive.
Yeah, you saw what happened to him. Suzanne takes you down.
He'd be nice, though, to I guess, read your eulogy, Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
His voice.
Yeah,
well, you don't want him to read your baptismal wishes.
No. When they say repent, 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 repent. That song.
One of the songs he said, "I was born this way. I had no choice. Born with the gift of a golden voice." Not bad.
He's a poet.
He's a poet, but they don't know it, right? Yeah. So then he died in as I said, 71. The Doors carried on till 73. They released 2 albums in that time, none of which did anything. So it kind of shows you Jim Morrison's role in the band. It's just he was the band, and in many ways he was the personality, he was the front man. So let's talk about some stats. The Doors, I'm not going to go through all that. I'll go through a bit. They sold over 4 million records in the United States, 8 million singles. They had 3 million selling singles in the U.S., Light My Fire, Hello, I Love You, and Touch Me. We might play Touch Me later on. It was an interesting song, rather, because it's fully orchestrated, which was odd for kind of a blues-based band. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. Rolling Stone magazine ranked them 41st on the list of 100 greatest artists of all time. If you still pay attention to Rolling Stone magazine as they become increasingly irrelevant, but that might say something. In 2002, Manzarek and Krieger started playing together again, renaming themselves the Doors of the 21st Century. And Ian Astbury of The Cult was on vocals, which was a really fortunate catch because the guy looks like Jim Morrison and he sounds like him. Now, I don't know if he should try a Jim Morrison impression or if he just get I don't know, Shania Twain or somebody and just take it in a different direction. But he did a good job. Now, John Densmore, the drummer, opted to sit it out, and together with the Morrison estate, sued the duo over use of the band's name, and they won. So after a short time, they changed their name to Riders on the Storm, and they got hit on that one, so they settled on the Manzarek Krieger band and continued to tour until Manzarek died in 2013. He was 74 years old. The interesting thing, I mentioned the estate. When Jim Morrison died, his estate went to his girlfriend, Pam Courson. And when she died in 74, it went to her parents, with all his notebooks, with all his everything. So, and then what happened was his parents, whom he never spoke to, as I mentioned, sued the Coursons. So everything is so strange what happened to this guy's his money and his legacy. I'm not sure where it stands now, because of course his parents are dead, and he has a brother and a sister surviving. I'm not sure where the money is, but we're talking tens of millions of dollars is generated by the Doors. They're very influential. So why am I talking about the Doors? Why did I decide to do this piece? Well, if you're interested in classic rock, I think it's a band you have to spend some time with. They were part of what I would call a psychedelic performance art, kind of prog rock movement that came to light in the late 60s, and whereby it was, I guess, permitted to write poetic lyrics about serious subjects that were in turn accepted as poetry. Morrison wanted to be known as a poet, and he got books of poetry published during his lifetime. And they had somewhat of a social impact. The other aspect of the Doors that kind of feeds into the immortality, I would say, is the darkness of the band. In fact, if you see a movie, there's a Kiefer Sutherland movie, I think it's called Lost Boys, in which they play vampires. And they go back to this cave every night, and hanging off the wall is a huge picture of Jim Morrison. And I thought, boy, this just doesn't quit. But it's that darkness that the Doors have. And if they have major key kind of songs, they never sound too happy. Morrison had this sex, death formula that you'll see all these kind of icons have it, from James Dean to Marilyn Monroe. You'll see it filter through James Bond movies. It's a tricky formula, but if you get it right, it can really sustain an interest. So that's why I think the the Doors are worth listening to, and why your time has been well spent listening to me rattle on about them. Why don't we end with a song I mentioned earlier? It's called Touch Me. It was written by Robbie Krieger and with a full orchestra, and it was performed on television. You can YouTube this one. This is Dr. Ian M. Clarke about to sign off. We just spoke about Jim Morrison and the Doors. Give them a listen, and even from the perspective of how come these guys were and are so influential. No one before or after the Doors has ever sounded like them, and that says something. So signing off, I'm Dr. Ian M. Clarke.
I'm Ferris Kennedy.
And I'm Stephen Wheeler.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take care of yourself. Drive safely.